Sean Reiner, rest his soul. He came to me one time and he said, when I heard death is certain, life is not, that was the first time I ever heard like double kick patterns, because there's definitely a kind of a fragmented pattern that just occurs through the whole thing. And I was like, that is because I couldn't play double bass through the entire song like I wanted to. So I had to, rest, necessity, mother of invention.
The David Ellefson Show. Featuring Grammy Award winner David Ellefson and respected metal journalist Joshua Toomey. Presented by EllefsonEmporium.com. Here's David and Joshua.
Okay, so today we've got Gene Hoglan joining us, one of the
Atomic Clock.
The Atomic Clock, yes. I just remember Gene from back in the days with Dark Angel, and I had to wear my Dark Angel shirt. I have a couple. Had a buddy of mine here, Paul Thind. He had a record label, and I actually officiated his wedding, so he keeps sending me Dark Angel t-shirts. So,
Nice.
So anyway, I remember Gene because Jim Durkin auditioned and I guess for a minute rehearsed with Megadeth before Kerry King joined the band. And so I just remember Gene from that day, back then. And then suddenly he was really in the game. I don't know what, in the 2000s, late 90s, kind of with Dethklok and into Testaments.
He would have joined Death in, the mid 90s. So,
yeah. Okay.
And then kind of doing the Death stuff, and then with Fear Factory, Dethklok, Testament, some of the great Testament stuff he did throughout the years. So yeah. I mean,
he's do with Testament.
Let's see. So yeah, he ended up doing. He actually did backing vocals on "Show No Mercy" by Slayer. Obviously, the Dark Angel stuff. Yeah, then he joins Death in around 93, and then he did the Strapping Young Lad. He was on Testament's Demonic record. Some more Strapping Young Lad, some Devin Townsend solo, and then Dethklok around 2007. So, yeah, Fear Factory 2010, back to Testament 2012.
So I'll tell you what, why don't you run down when he comes on? Why don't you run the list? And we'll see if he grimaces or if he gets excited about any of them.
Yeah, man, he's got a great story about, I can't remember the band exactly what band it was, like Chimera or something, but they asked him if he could come fill in, but this is pre, being able to, send files and things like that. So he actually had to find a Best Buy on the way between his house and the gig in Seattle or something. They had to call ahead to a Best Buy, make sure they had the records available, and then get them. And then he listened to them in the car, drove up there, and then did the gig. So yeah, he's definitely been he's just a monster drummer. Some of my favorite stuff, if you've ever watched his Atomic Clock kind of how to play drums videos or whatever, the guy's crazy. Plays all this crazy double bass, but he wears combat boots, and he also wears ankle weights. So it's just like, what are you doing, man? Like you've lost your mind. But he's one of the more incredible drummers out there.
Yeah, extreme drummers,
right?
Extreme thrash. Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. Well, I remember seeing him when he came through with Dethklok here to Phoenix. You said that was 2007, right? That was.
Yeah. I mean, he's been in the band since then. So I mean, they've toured recently too. So could have been any time in between now and then. But yeah, he's a monster drummer.
Good. Well, I look forward to getting caught up, especially after all the years in LA. So, hey, everybody, David and Josh here, and just want to let you know about Rockabilia, our new partners here on the show. And you can visit them and enter David10 for 10% off on any of your purchases. So some cool stuff they have there, Josh.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome company. I mean, if you're of my generation of the, we go to the magazine aisle, and, when it was a print magazine, and, Rockabilia was in every Metal Edge and Metal Maniacs and whatever else, and you would circle every Megadeth t-shirt you wanted, or Metallica or Slayer or whatnot. So super pumped to have Rockabilia on with the David Ellefson Show. And, just a few things. They've got over 500,000 items over at rockabilia.com, including staples like the Master of Puppets shirts, Rest in Peace shirts. They do limited edition exclusive drops each month. And the one thing that they wanted to stress was everything is 100% authentic. No bootlegs over there at rockabilia.com. So that's obviously a plus there too.
Cool. So the money goes where it's supposed to go. So, all right. Excellent. All right. So check it out. Rockabilia, David 10 for 10% off. Check it out. Rockabilia.com. So you sent me some photos there. You with the bass back in the day, getting going. How's it feeling? Getting ramped up here, ready to rock?
Feels pretty good, man. Kind of going through the first primer record, kind of getting my chops back on that one. Right. It's not the most complicated stuff, and like I've told you in the past too, man. Bobby's the bass player at heart, so playing bass in a band with him is kind of a treat, because there's a lot of where the guitar will drop out, and it'll just be the bass kind of playing the riff, and then the guitars come back in for the chorus and things like that. So you get to kind of shine a little bit playing some bass in Primer 55.
Yeah, well, that's good, man. And as we know, a big part of it too is also about the endurance, right? Mm-hmm. It's just about keeping up the endurance. Learning the songs is one thing, being able to play the parts is another. And then the other part is just having the physicality, right? The endurance to keep ripping through it and be on stage and make it look easy. And because I find if you're playing finger parts, there's a certain endurance you need for that. Right? And if you're playing with the plectrum, there's certain riffing and down picking and various things that require some stamina, right? So there's all of that stuff. There he is. Hey, Gene. How are you, buddy?
There. Hi, guys. How are you?
Great, man. What's happening? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing, Dave? Good to see you, Josh.
Yeah.
Good to see you too, man. It's good. It's been a minute. I think the last time I saw you was at Louder Than Life, hanging out.
That's right. Heck yeah, man. That was a brief moment there, but that's very cool.
Yeah, you're doing Dethklok there, right?
What was that?
I believe you were with Dethklok at that point.
I was, absolutely. Yep. That is right.
We all have our Dark Angel shirts on.
Oh, are you kidding? Oh, that's awesome. Heck yeah. I got my super Jim Durkin shirt on.
Man.
Heck yeah. Rest in peace, Jim.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you know Paul Thind. He's my neighbor out here, and he had a label. Forgot what the name of his label is. There's a label out of Northern Cal some years back. So he sends me Dark Angel shirts all the time. So he's my source. So
there you go. Excellent.
Well, hey, welcome to the David Ellefson Show, and always Josh Toomey is my co-host and cohort here, and Gene, dude, it's great to see you first of all, and it's fun to get caught up with you. Where are you at right now? What part of the world are you in?
I just got back to San Diego. That's where I live, and
Nice.
I have just spent about 30,000 miles on the road over the last couple of months. We had I had 3 different projects going, and that was, let me see, we had Dark Angel in South America, and then we had Dethklok in Australia, and then Bear McCreary in Europe. And now I'm back in town for a little bit, and the next run is going to be a U.S. run later this month with Bear McCreary, and then directly over to Europe in June with Dark Angel and Dethklok in June, and then more Dark Angel in June. So it's pretty nonstop, David.
Yeah, so let me ask you about this. So do you have a manager that does all this for you, or do you just kind of you deal with everybody one-on-one and you just take the call, book your flights, you make it happen? Like, what's your sort of infrastructure like if you're Gene Hoglan?
I have a management team. I have definitely a manager, and he has a team, and they take care of all the day-to-day stuff. And he kind of tells me, just stay out of the day-to-day stuff. We got that. We'll, weigh in on the big decisions, on the financial decisions or the scheduling, like if you can pull this off kind of thing. But for the most part, we are autonomous in that regard, and just I've got the management, and they do the scheduling, and they take care of the calendar. And I always refer to everybody when somebody says, "Hey man, are you available in November of 2025 kind of thing?" I'm like, "Oh God, hit up the management."
Call them
more than that.
Call them.
They know my schedule better than me.
Yeah.
Hey Gene, has there been a time where you're kind of booked almost too close to each other, where you're getting off one tour, jumping on a plane, and immediately, basically showing up for sound check for the next gig?
The last 3 months have been exactly that. I fly home one night, and the next morning I'm on a plane to the next venue. Like, with the Dark Angel in Santiago and Buenos Aires in March, it was, fly home, you're home to do some laundry, and then get on the plane up to LA to start the Dethklok rehearsals in LA for a day, and then flying out to Australia with Dethklok, and then getting back from that, home for a day, home for a laundry, portion scheduling, and then on the plane up to LA for the Bear rehearsals, and then over to Europe. And then, like, for instance, I just flew directly from Bear McCreary's last show in France straight to Sao Paulo, Brazil, where we just played the Bangers Open Air Festival, and that was awesome show. That was a great show to begin with, and the only thing that made that show potentially unfortunate was that our guitarist Eric Meyer, he tried everything he could. His flight got canceled. Then the next flight got canceled. So we had to do the show as a 4-piece. We have done that before in the past. And, Laura Christine, our other guitarist, she stepped up huge time, and just, she like at rehearsal, when we're finding out, we were rehearsing in Sao Paulo. At rehearsal, we're finding out Eric is not going to make the show, like, period. They cannot get him on a flight until tomorrow morning, and he won't get here in time for the show. So, she's going through the mental thing. Okay, what part of Eric's can I play? Here's a lead of his I can pull off. And, and we were able to rehearse one time with Lara as our own sole guitarist, and the show came out great, so we're very fortunate in that regard. We faced a challenge, and we definitely, we managed fantastically. So that's pretty good.
So you're talking about gigs that you've had, right, for the most part. So the material. So like we get, we're out, even if you're back and forth, there's a little refresh period, of course, just kind of brush up on the tunes. But before you jumped on, Josh was telling me about a gig that you took maybe to go to Seattle and play with Chimera, maybe it was, right? Where you had to go to Best Buy and get the albums and learn the material, right? So these... Right. And Jimmy DeGrasso is a dear friend of mine. It's you get the call on Tuesday. We need you on stage in Cleveland on Wednesday, tomorrow, and learn 16 songs, right? So for drummers, how do you learn that? Is it just a matter of counting measures? Is it like, what's your process of learning a song anyway? And especially if you're under pressure and you got to learn 15 songs you probably haven't heard or don't know before.
Right. Well, I remember that, and I remember that, Josh, and that was Unearth, and they're
Unearth, right?
Pretty darn complicated, complicated band structurally, especially from the drums. At the time they had Mike Justian on drums, and he had a lot of complicated parts, and they do a lot of the dun 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 dun, a lot. They were kind of one of the progenitors of that style. So it was, definitely stop by the Best Buy, pick it up, and just burn it into your brain on the drive. I am a musical illiterate. So, I don't read music. I don't chart anything. I just listen to things, and I definitely go more by feel than counting. So I am, I definitely, I can feel when it's 4. I can feel when it's 8. If I have to count them. It's like, oh, this one was 7. So remember, chop out that last one. And, there are times when I do count, but that is about 2% of the time. And that's only when it's necessary. And, but yeah, it's just, I do the same thing that an illiterate will do when they go to their restaurants. They hear them, they hear the menu and they memorize the menu, and that is pretty much what I do. I I definitely have, I've been told I have a steel trap mind for riffs and beats and things like that, where, yes, when, like, say, Opeth comes to you at, 2:00 in the afternoon and says, at 6:00, we got to be on stage. Can you learn our set? And I'm like, oh, yes. I don't know how to do it.
The answer is always yes. Exactly. I get
absolutely. I never turned down any kind of challenge and, that sort of thing. So that's pretty good.
Hey, so let's go back to the origin story, at least from where you and I first met. Early 80s, Jim Durkin was at least rehearsing with Megadeth at one point. We were at Curly Joe's studio, I remember, over kind of downtown LA, and in Dark Angel, of course. And he was, we were kicking around getting the second guitar player, and eventually Kerry King ended up just filling in for us in early 1984,
right,
as we went up to the Bay Area and debuted the band. But I seem to remember meeting you around that time, of course, through Dark Angel, and I looked up some of the history a little bit, that you were, I guess, roadieing a bit for Lombardo. We all kind of gravitated in through some tentacle brought us into this thing, right? But
right.
So here you are, you're in the mix, right? Because we're all part of the same little,
absolutely.
Pool there. So, you've got Lombardo, who's making a name. Benante, Anthrax is blowing up. Lars, of course, was, a mile ahead of all of us with Metallica. We got Gar in our band. So, this is a genre that was known not only for great guitar players, but fantastic drummers and unique drummers creating a style. And you come along and you make a name for yourself. How do you, what was it that carved your path? Because, if there was a big four of drummers, there's certainly a big 5 or 6. There was Rat Skates and Overkill. There's Tom Hunting, Exodus, and there's you. I mean, you're probably, if there's 7 or 8 guys who really carved the path to thrash, you're one of them. What was the thing that you felt kind of set you apart from all these guys?
Well, I suppose, like when I guess I knew all, like, of the 7, or the 6 right. others, I knew everybody's style real well. And, like, for instance, when I was working with Slayer, I was their light guy. I never touched a piece of equipment, and I tell you, I was the worst roadie ever because I never touched equipment. I never set up Dave's drums. But one thing I would do is I would play some of their sound checks with them on the little run that we did. I was 16 years old, and this is now it's become a pretty well-known story. And actually, I kept this one to myself forever until Dave actually introduced this scenario that actually happened. Was when Dave introduced his double bass, because he recorded Show No Mercy with a single bass, and when he brought in the double bass, I went to Tom's place. That's where they would rehearse, Tom's garage. And I just happened to go to a rehearsal. I was like, "Hey, Dave, you got double bass going, kick ass. That's awesome." And he's like, "Man, I am just not getting it. I'm just not grasping. Whoa, what am I doing here?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, I don't know. Let me sit back there. Let me see what see if I can help you with anything." And so I start flying on the double bass, and I start playing the beat that I think he's probably trying to play, the I don't know, the Angel of Death chorus beat. Sure, right, the downbeat with the flying double bass. It's like, dude, holy moly, hey man, like, how are you doing that? Like, I've been to your house. I played your drums. You have a single kit. When did you get double bass? How long have you been playing double bass? I literally looked at my watch. I'm like, I don't know. What time is it? I mean, this is my
3 minutes.
Right 3 minutes, kind of thing. And he's like, all right, well then, let me pick your brain. What are you doing here? And so I start going all these things. Okay, well, here's what I'm doing here. Left foot. I'm really concentrating to make sure that is coming down with, I'm an open-handed player, even at that time. So I'm like, left foot, left hand, right hand, left foot, downbeat. Okay, we're trying. And he's like, okay, well, that's helpful. Let me at it. And so that's how that started. And I knew everybody's style, so well. Like, because I definitely I am we all are OG thrash metalers. So Dave's style I knew very well, and that was I always thought it was it's very single alternating strokes, lots of this, very Mitch Mitchell. And and kind of for me at the time, kind of a Peter Criss or Keith Moon,
Sure.
Just a real forceful, but not an incredible amount of technicality, but still really good. And let me tell you one thing, and this is one thing maybe not a lot of people know, and this is absolute kudos to the masterful Dave Lombardo, is he had to record Show No Mercy without cymbals. Bill Matoyer had requested that, he's like, we're just getting too much bleed. Can you record this album without cymbals? So having to play that album without and overdub the cymbals later, you can definitely hear it.
We did the So Far So Good So What record like that. Our producer Paul Lanny came in, and for him it probably wasn't so much about bleed. For him, he was a big fan of Mutt Lange, and the Def Leppard Hysteria record just came out. And of course, that was the iconic record of everything being perfect, isolated. I mean, just pristine, right? So he was going for that ultimate separation. Chuck Beeler ended up doing the same thing, and I don't like it. I don't think it helped the album at all. I don't know how you felt about it with,
well, I've always that makes a lot of sense, because the drums after Killing Is My Business, after Peace Sells, with Gar just being Gar, like Chuck's, poor Chuck, his introduction, because Chuck was Gar's drum tech when we did some touring together, and it seemed like the drums all of a sudden just became, I don't want to say stiff, but definitely way more controlled, way more. It wasn't that kind of just, this could fall off the rails at any time. And it just seemed very, very
it's interesting that you talk about that too, that sort of Keith Moon thing. And even as you're doing your hand movements like that with kind of the Lombardo thing and what you picked up, Gar was a big Keith Moon guy. He loved that. Billy Cobham to Keith Moon, that's sort of everything, kind of on the edge. Have you seen, what's that? There's a Netflix show that the drummer from Jane's Addiction did. It's about drumming. Have you seen that? Because you got to see it, man. It's a really great, look, I'm the bass player, so what do I know, right? But one night I watched it during COVID or whatever. But I watch it, and he did a really great job going back into, because you just hit on it, like kind of the jazz drummers, and then moving into kind of the 60s rock stuff. And then moving into, let's call it Keith Moon, into the 70s guys, and then wear it in the 80s. And, he did a really good chronology of how styles changed. Like you say, the open stick versus closed hands. And one thing that I liked about Keith Moon, and maybe you know this, but there were guys that started their fills, they'd hit the 1 and then they'd start a fill on a 2, right? To get right, versus Keith Moon, did he start fills on the 1? There was something very distinct about him, that he did things different than everybody else. And as he explained it and then played a song, and you go, oh my God, because because drummers and guitar players in thrash metal, you guys really are the cornerstones of the genre, right? So it's how you two play together. I think it kind of begged the question. As I was watching you explain that, when you're writing drum parts, especially in thrash music, are you kind of riffing and writing? Kim Ruz from Merciful Fate was great at this as well. He would write sort of riffs. He would write riffs within the song. He wasn't just playing time. He would write riffs kind of within the riffs, right?
And that's what made Kim Ruz such a memorable drummer and an influence on us all, because he was just always so rock solid tight, and he would play those riffs inside the riffs, and kind of create sort of a counterbalance to what was happening. And that was kind of where I always wanted to kind of take my style. Like I was saying, I knew Dave's style, I knew Charlie's style. Charlie came from more like the real traditional heavy metal approach, but amping it up a little bit. Like when I later heard that the first song Anthrax ever played with Charlie was Fast as a Shark, I was like, I get that. I understand that. Charlie had, Charlie was such a great drummer, and he was kind of the most all-encompassing style. He could play the straight ahead groove beat. So could everybody. Gar came, and he bridged that gap between the groove and the jazz and like whatever Megadeth song that is, like Andre maybe.
It's nobody at the skin. No, you're right. Yeah. It's funny, the mechanics, right? So when Metallica play either the demo version of that,
right,
or Four Horsemen, it's a straight staccato, right? But when Gar played it, was with a shuffle, it's almost like Hot for Teacher underneath mechanics, right?
Sure.
Right, and it had this kind of shuffle swing to it. So you do that a lot, right? Your kick drum patterns, and of course kick drum. It's funny with drummers. To me, there's Kenny Aronoff, there's Alex Van Halen, very distinctive by their snare tone, right? Defining, right?
Right.
In the way that Fieldy from Korn once said, your picking hand or plucking hand is the hand that you usually write your name with. Therefore, that's your signature sound. It doesn't come from the fretting end. It comes from the picking and the plucking end. And I started thinking about drummers. Snares became a signature part, even though, I don't know, because you're using your left hand probably. But at one point, maybe in the 80s or something, snare sounds were a defining sound. And then I would give credit to for sure that suddenly kick drum, as you just talked about with the double bass thing with Lombardo, the kick drum became a defining part of when you could tell, fuck, that's Gene Hoglan playing. Right? Like,
that's fun.
Defined you, right? So I don't know, that somehow that worked its way into that. Was that built around guitar, the thrash guitar riffs? What was that? How did that develop?
I suppose, well, I guess it kind of came from my inability. Because, like, for instance, I remember Sean Reiner, rest his soul, he came to me one time and he said, when I heard Death is Certain, Life is Not, that was the first time I ever heard, like, double kick patterns, because there's definitely a kind of a fragmented pattern that just occurs through the whole thing. And I was like, that is because I couldn't play double bass through the entire song like I wanted to. So I had to, rest, necessity, mother of invention, all that kind of stuff. And he's like, and then that thing in for the intro of Darkness Descends, that's a kick pattern. And never heard those before. You had kick patterns all over your stuff. And that's where, because I wrote a lot of the early Dark Angel material, and some of that stuff when I was like, well, gosh, I could play patterns on my feet and I could write patterns with my right hand. So just combine the two. And I'm like, I don't know where anybody else might be doing this. I can't, because usually if you're playing double bass, it's doogie dagga doogie dagga doogie dagga, and the riff is going doogie dagga 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 along with it. And I'm like, well, why don't you try to play bumpity dun 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 dun, that's just play a pattern, play the pattern, and match those up. And I was like, hey, that's one little thing that Dark Angel can kind of separate ourselves from. And so with all that in mind, that's where I knew everybody's style. Rat Skates, Tom Hunting. Tom Hunting is, for me, the true Keith Moon of the thrash genre, because Keith Moon was always like, there was something about Keith Moon. He is one of the most non-graspable drummers around. And I got a pretty decent ear. I can usually cover, I hear something, I can play all that stuff. Keith Moon, challenging. Tom Hunting, he has this style that is just bursts of oddities that are so glorious. But, I was like, wow, Tom would be the most challenging guy to try to cover note for note. I mean, I'd give it my best shot, but Tom was always by far the most challenging. Bonded by Blood, if it wasn't the fastest album, but drum-wise, it was the kookiest in such a glorious way. And so I knew everybody's style. And so my style that I was bringing in from the pre-thrash metal eras were things like the double bass. However, there was Tommy Aldridge had a huge influence on me. And you notice he never just played just fills. He would combine the kicks with the upper parts, that kind of thing. Steve Smith, the intro to Where Were You by Journey, that kind of is sort of the style that I absorbed and brought into the thing. You had everybody was doing fills all with their hands, and I was like, I don't hear anybody doing a lot of that Where Were You kind of fill. Or Vinny Appice was he had the exact same fill in one of the early Dio songs with single foot. And Leonard Hayes, before I had a double bass, his single foot was a big influence on me. So that is what I tried to bring to that style. And so that was a way that I could, it's like everybody was great. Okay, well, you want to be part of everybody as well. So what can you bring to the table? And that is what I tried to bring. So,
yeah, fantastic, man. That is great. Thank you for the whole lineage and history.
Awesome. Well,
we were all now smarter for having listened to that.
So, Josh was going down your resume right before you jumped on from, Death to Strapping Young Lad, Fear Factory, Dethklok, everything. In fact, I saw you, I think it was 2007, you came to Phoenix, or I saw when Dethklok, I think it was the first tour that you guys were doing.
Right.
And super, super cool. I was intrigued because, Trans-Siberian Orchestra was doing its thing, so Dethklok has its own sort of, you don't want to call it Broadway, but there's these different presentations other than just typical dudes in a band riffing through some songs, So how was that as far as, on stage? Because I would assume it's very orchestrated, right? There's a video or a visual production, there's everything about it. So with that, I would assume things are probably pretty set, right? It's not an ad lib kind of gig. It's more of a, you're not reading charts, obviously, just like you said, you don't read music. So this is all from memory, but everybody's is locked in. It's purely a performance, right? It's a visual performance type of gig, right?
Very much. And as Brendan Small very cogently puts it, he says, we are kind of the orchestra pit for what we want you to be focused on. It's like we are in shadows for the most part. We're not, we don't have lights on us. I mean, you obviously, we kind of look like a live version of what that Mystery Science 3000, like you see the three bodies in the front, the drummer in the back, and we're in shadow, and we're just little silhouettes against this big old giant screen behind us. And we want you watching that screen. Right. But, and as that was our, that was a very nascent version of Dethklok. When you saw us, I mean, you probably saw us if that was 2007, you might've seen us at like the University of, Arizona or something, because we were doing some college tour at the time. And that was pretty new for us. And so, but that's when we were starting to establish, this is what Dethklok needs to be live. We're like, I played with a click track. At that point, I was the only one playing to the click track. And so, and I never had like a monitor or anything of the visuals. I just learned it all by I literally rehearsed to a click track. And these days now I do have the show, and the show is regimented. Brendan and I take some time before most tours, and we construct the show. Which songs do we want to pull in? What songs do we want to leave out? Do we want to leave this big section together? And we get that together with the editor. And then when we get all of that together, I start rehearsing the show months in advance, because usually I have so many things going on up until, okay, there's going to be Dethklok 4 months from now. You better start rehearsing now, just so you get it all together. And then you get to go away and do all the other things, but you have a whole bunch of rehearsals going up until a certain point, and then you get to return to those rehearsals. And now I have a monitor, and everything is cut to the one on with Dethklok. So it's like, if all of a sudden we lose the ears, we lose the click, we lose something, as long as I've got that monitor, I can actually play to the, okay, there's the cut, there's the cut, and there's a time.
Cool. Yeah.
There's a couple of times each tour where some kind of, atrocity happens to the
Always.
ears or something. Yeah. And so it's like,
Yeah.
all right, you're winging it, you're playing to this, and that's when you have to just kind of resort back to the internal clock, and just, boy, you better play real tight, so now it's easier because I do have a little monitor by the stage. It's like, oh, this makes it easy. I used to have to kind of, look over my shoulder when something's happening, trying to sit down. I wanted to set up like a little bicycle mirror onto my drum just so I could see something. And now, hey, we got monitors. So
No, that's awesome.
So I wanted to ask you, Gene, about the Bear McCreary stuff you're doing now. I know he's obviously famous for the Walking Dead theme and a lot of themes and things out there. So what are you guys actually touring? What are you playing out there?
Well, since he is, to start it all off, a few years ago, Bear and I and Brendan Small and Brian Bellick from Dethklok, we all worked on the Godzilla King of the Monsters movie. I think we did a cover of Godzilla that, we got Buck Dharma to sign off on. He gave us his thumbs up and he thought that was a really cool version. And I remember at that session, Serge Tankian ended up singing on it. And I met Serge that at that session. And I remember Bear, as we were kind of leaving, Bear said, just watching what just went, it was the quickest, easiest 45 minutes of drumming I ever had in my life. And Bear was like, hey, this puts a thought into my head. I have a bunch of material. I'm going to call you at some point. Love to work together again at some point. And about a year and a half later, he reached out and said, I have a number of songs. Like I've been writing my own stuff outside of all the soundtrack stuff. I have an album that I'm putting together. And, I'd like you to be a part of it. And I was like, sure, send over the material. The material was killer. I was only familiar with Bear through whatever soundtrack stuff he was doing. I mean, this was back in 2019 when he had said it. So The Walking Dead was going around. And I admit, I don't know The Walking Dead music at all. I know Bear is part of it, but I don't catch a lot of Walking Dead or a lot of the other shows that Bear worked on, but I know that's what he does. One thing, however, is all this material that he was writing, the majority of it came out on his solo album, The Singularity. It was all killer. It was killer material. I was like, yes, Bear, because I was like, oh, sure, man, just send me some material. Let me see. He's like, just let me see, gauge your opinion on this stuff. I was like, this is all deadly. Let's do this. Let's do this album. So it was one of those COVID recorded records. And by the time it came out, and, we did a show, one single show in Los Angeles with it. And, we had Slash as a guest guitarist. Buck Dharma was also a guest guitarist, and a lot of the cats that played on the album, like, Lara Christine and Omer Benzvi and all the guys that played on the record. We all did this show. Came out really good. And Bear was like, I want to go take this on the road. And so he's not really known for putting out metal albums, but he is known for all that other material. So, all the TV shows and all the movies that he works on. So he was getting, I guess, more interest. Like people were, I guess, lukewarm to the, okay, that's cool. You got a solo album out. What do you think about playing some of your TV and movie stuff as well? And so Bear kind of combined both worlds. And so this last tour that we did, I think we've only done one so far. Yeah, one. We have a US run coming up and then an Australian run over summertime. He's combined both. A lot of songs from Singularity and then a lot of, the Walking Dead theme, the theme from, Outlander, a couple of Outlander songs. I guess that's a real popular show. And Black Sails and, Black Battlestar Galactica. I think that's a super popular one from, I guess, back in the day kind of thing. So there's all that. Combined both, he's rocked up a lot of those versions that people are familiar with, I guess, are just pretty much orchestrations. And now he's rocked it up, a lot of drums, a lot of guitar and stuff. So he's turned it into kind of a rock sort of, definitely a rock night, so that is how that works. And we just did a bunch of shows over in Europe and they were killer. So.
God, how cool. What a fun thing to do. And again, it's funny, you're in that world. Again, it's kind of like this, remember Petrelli telling me, with Paul O'Neill with Trans-Siberian.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He loved Broadway,
Right.
Broadway to Kiss, you know what I mean? And it's sort of combining, and it's like what you're doing, bringing this theatrical part of it, because film and TV scores are a whole different mentality. You're writing around an emotional moment in a visual presentation, just like Dethklok. Hey, let's talk about Testament for a minute. It's funny. Testament have had fantastic drummers. You, of course, being one of them. Dave Lombardo even went through the ranks. I think right. It's one of those bands that is just 100% cred. I mean, anything Testament is awesome. Like Overkill, or there's just some bands that are just no matter what, 100% cred. A great season you had with them, right? With the music you did with them, the records, like probably I would say a bit of even a reset maybe for them. To kind of reset, right? I would say, right?
Sure. I'd say that.
Talk a little bit about just your experience with that, because again, friends of the community, right?
Absolutely. It was one of those things when back in like 1996, when, as we all know, 96, that was part of that transitional era, like, musical transitional era where nobody was quite sure what was happening. And that's when, they were working on an album, which became the Demonic album. And to Testament's credit, they went even heavier, like their album before that, The Ritual, was kind of, it wasn't quite as as Demonic
was. And the 90s were a tough time. I mean, we went kind of down into the theaters. Obviously, we embraced the mainstream and rode that wave. And then we hit a wall with Risk with that. It's funny as you say that, because everybody went heavier. Disturbed, Godsmack, everybody went heavier. We went softer. You know what I mean? So, the 90s, I think for us thrash guys, was really threading the needle, trying to figure out what is the path forward. How do you either reinvent, recreate? And that's why I think when you were in the band, that was part of turning that corner, recreating and making, they said, instead of going more mainstream, just go fucking heavier, just hit the pedal, and go all the way.
Right. Well, that's where I think for myself, I've always found that you can, if you always err on the side of heavier, you will never go wrong, because that heavier is cred. Nobody can come back to you and go, well, you guys tried to write songs for the radio or whatever. So that's what I was kind of pushing with Testament, because they weren't quite sure what to do. And so myself and their second guitarist, Derek Ramirez, who was one of the original members of Legacy, and that's Eric Peterson's cousin, we were always pushing, write heavier, and that was a pretty psychotically heavy record for Testament. And it was kind of so heavy that their crowd was just kind of like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is too much of a transition. This is way too, and it just seemed pretty natural to me. It's like, hey, I have a feeling the world is going to get heavier. Like, the one thing that, death metal was fully flying. Black metal was fully flying at that time. And I'm like, the world, like, maybe the world doesn't know, the radio listening public or the MTV public or whoever is now listening to grunge or whatever. Grunge never killed heavy, like, thrash metal. Death metal, that's pretty fun. That's what kind of put the spike in thrash metal, because it was like, hey, we got something even heavier now.
Right.
And so you have all these other underground bands that, they're not mainstream, but it was really easy to see, hey, the whole world is going heavier. Like, when you had bands like Korn and whoever else was down tuning and getting their songs really popular, it was like, hey, this is not, girls, this is like, everything's going a little heavier. It's really obvious to see that the tastes are getting heavier. So bring out something heavier. That's just the way I saw it. But I've always been kind of an underground person. So, and so for Testament, for that was it, they tried it, and then they started really getting good at it on the next album with The Gathering. That was a great record. And they really they knew how to kind of hone it back a little bit and kind of focus a little bit, and bringing in Mr. Lombardo on drums on that was a good thing. Stevie D on bass. Holy moly, great move there. And And then what I think the next album after that was Low, another killer record. So Testament was starting to find their way. And then they went away for a long time, and then coming back with Formation of Damnation with Mr. Bowstaff on drums. Good little effort. And then whatever I did with them, helped, I guess, maybe help reset them to.
I think so.
Yeah, there you go.
I agree too.
I appreciate it.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, Gene,
Awesome. Well, thank you.
all right, let's go back at the Wayback Machine. Obviously, with Jim Durkin auditioning for Megadeth and rehearsing with Megadeth in '84, you joined Dark Angel in '84. So, did the timeline line up? Was Jim rehearsing with Megadeth and playing in Dark Angel with you around the same time? Where were we at timeline with that? Do you remember?
At that point, by the time Megadeth was working with Carrie, like a lot of us went up to those shows. We caught some of your early shows. We would always drive up to the Bay Area, go to Ruthie's, go to the Stone, go to, because there was, I'll always admit, thrash metal is a Los Angeles birthed scene, Metallica, LA, Dark Angel, LA, Slayer, LA. But the migration up to the Bay Area, there were just more fans. They were more open-minded, all that kind of stuff. And, but yeah, I was not playing with Dark Angel when Jim was jamming. And I got to admit, Jim, he was so low key and he kept that to himself for so long. I think we were doing Darkness Descends 2 years later when he happened to let it drop that. Yeah, I was jamming.
Well, I mean, it's like cheating on your girlfriend. I mean, it's playing in another band behind your band's back. I mean, that's you get kicked out for stuff like that.
Well, Dark Angel was always a Jim creation. He created Dark, so he's allowed to do whatever he wants. And he mentioned that you guys were playing with the drummer named was it like Lejean?
Dijon Carruthers. That's right. He came in. That's right. So my friend Greg Handevitt, he parted out, and then you're right. That was when we were working with Jim, probably late '83, I guess, and that was
I think it was in '82 because you guys were doing shows in like winter time of '84 with Carrie, February or something. They had just come back from going up to the Bay Area the first time, like just a month or so before. So I remember all of that. I remember being at one of those shows and Carrie had a Paid Assassin t-shirt on, and he used to make his own leather, all that old leather stuff he made himself. And
dude, I remember we were building our stage set for those first shows in Carrie's backyard. We actually nicked some plywood from a construction site up in Hollywood and threw it in my van with our roadie Scott Menzies, and we'd drive it down to Carrie's, unload it, and then we'd sit back there, we'd saw it, paint it, build it. And I remember one day walking in the house and there's Carrie's dad over to the left,
right,
sheriff, right, or something. Paper. It's like Andy Griffith, right? So then over there on the other side, you see Carrie's mom like knitting. Right? This is like the most wholesome picture of
absolutely.
A household. Meanwhile, Carrie's on the floor building like a pentagram belt, or pounding nails into the leather wristband,
Right. I remember all that. I remember the first day when he brought that. I remember carrying that big leather, the nails. I carried into the Roxy show for him. And he's like, "Hey, can you carry this?" But they always, because the thing that he made, the pentagram that he had made for the Megadeth shows, it had colored studs on it. And I'd never seen that before. I was like, I didn't even know, anodized colored studs. And Slayer always referred to it as the light bright. Okay, well, I'm like, wow, I've never seen colored studs before. But yeah, he used to make all his own leather stuff and do his own, the big nail thing and all that stuff. And so, I just saw Carrie this weekend, and pretty much the first thing that he said is like, "Hey, one of your guys from Dark Angel," because they played the Bangers as well. They played the next day. He's like, "One of your guys from Dark Angel, his picture ended up on my visa." And and I'm just like, I looked at it. I just started cracking up because we do have a member in the band who they have similar features. And when Mike Gonzalez, our bassist, when he puts on his shades, people are like, Carrie, holy moly. They're asking for autographs. So I'm like, I just started cracking up. I didn't even see the picture. I was like, I know exactly.
He's the stunt double.
And he's like, yeah, I'm looking at this. I'm like, well, I could see where and why and how, but why? How? this ain't me kind of things. That was pretty funny. But
I know you told the story on my podcast a while back, but I'd like you to kind of tell David the story of you having to get Tom to go in to talk, Tom Araya to go talk to your parents,
right,
about letting you go on tour with Slayer at 16.
Yeah, and I had no idea that even happened. I mean, he might have even had to talk to my sister or somebody, but he was like, I found out 5 years ago, kind of thing, when we were doing that big final round of touring. And Tom was like, yeah, I had to go talk to your folks about it. And I was like, wow, crazy. He's like, well, you were a minor, we were about this. I had to become your ward for the shows, and Johnny, his brother. I mean, Johnny was like 15 at the time, and he'd been working for him for, I'd been seeing Slayer for a year and a half by then. Johnny was 14, always working for him at the time. So that's how that kind of worked out. But yeah, Tom was like, I had to.
Yeah, I remember going over to Tom's house because Carrie, those guys all lived in Southgate,
lived right around the corner.
Right around the corner. So we drive over to Tom's house to go to the garage where Slayer rehearsed, and I remember seeing Johnny over there all the time. You're right. He was just like a high school kid,
Right, absolutely.
And Carrie was pointing out the posters. Or there's this poster of him and Hannah, and they had like spandex. He goes, "Yeah, that was our Scorpions face." Anyway, over here, this is our Judas Priest face, and here we are over here. And,
right.
It was great, man. And it's funny because we were all like guys. We could have all interchanged and been in any one of each other's bands because that's how it was. And I like how you just said that. The thrash scene really was an LA birth scene, but there was, thank God for Exodus, because they really, they helped hang the hat up in the Bay Area, just because they were such a Bay Area band and everything about it. Yet they were the gatekeepers, and they would always welcome everybody in anytime any of us went up there. And we said Gary on the podcast, we were talking about some of those stories. It's like, he was always the guy, man, just like him and Bailoff welcoming everybody in.
Absolutely.
And it was what made, the I-5, they say Interstate 5, dude, that was the pipeline between LA through the grapevine, right through the pipeline of LA to San Francisco for the art scene to get its legs.
A quick 5-hour trip, and you're playing that night.
Yep, exactly.
Totally. So, but yeah, that was, and like when I went forever never knowing that Jim had done some stuff with you guys, and that always made me wonder, because the one thing I do know about when I joined Dark Angel, when I was with Dark Angel, Jim was playing the spider chord a lot. Yeah. That was a part of the early
Which Dark he got Angel from Dave, obviously, right?
That's why Jim never, he never said I invented this or anything. But for me, I wasn't really aware. I wasn't that cognizant of how that worked out, on guitar, because I was such a fledgling guitarist at the time. But I'm like, I see that in a bunch of Dark Angel material. So, wow, that's a really neat thing. So I learned how to play that instantly. So, but that's a really fun little thing that, was combined from this and that and the other, and all the early Megadeth material was so killer, like the 4-song demo, maybe. Mm-hmm. It was Love to Death, Skull, Mechanics, and was there something else? But that was such a savage demo, it was so good. Like the riff for Love to Death. I mean, what a great riff. It's like, holy, it's not boop, 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 like all the other bands, but that is.
I remember when Samantha Fox played it on KMET, because there were two stations, KMET and KLOS, right?
Right.
And they were the two big radio stations.
Right.
And it's funny, man, when I got to LA in 83, I mean, now you're hearing Ronnie Dio, Fastway, Def Leppard, to
Jim Ladd.
Yes, yeah, you're hearing all that stuff, and the new Maiden record, Power Slave, and all that stuff's on the radio. And so then they had this metal hour, right? And I remember it was like Queen's Reich, Queen of the Reich,
I remember
Warrior fighting for the earth, and then I remember she debuted Megadeth on the radio.
Right.
She played, I guess it was Mechanics. And it was so cool, man, because we'd get a half hour from midnight to 12:30 or something. There's like a half-hour metal show. Yeah. But you're right, and it's just like how the Headbangers Ball started, right? It was kind of that from 12 to 12:30 p.m. there was that half hour. There was like 10 videos. There was a Twisted Sister, an Iron Maiden, maybe a Ronnie Dio, and finally a Megadeth video or whatever. And there's that one window to try to squeeze your video in. But you're right about what you were talking about in the 90s, which are these sort of challenging times that, as long as you went heavier and more vicious and ferocious, it was always the saving grace for metal, because that's when you really tap the nerve of where metal fans really are, is not so much in the main. There's nothing wrong with the mainstream. There's nothing wrong with taking your band over there if you can legitimately, authentically, cross that line. But you are quintessentially one of those guys who has always been on the heavier side of every band you've been in, and because of it, those bands have always had not only grassroots and the cred like you talk about, but success. I mean, it's funny, the success that's happened. It's ironic. Right around the time you joined these bands, they often take off into this whole other thing because they went heavier with more radical drumming. And I mean, you are the poster child for basically making that happen. So we thank you.
Very kind. Thank you, David. I appreciate it. That's very cool.
Well, listen, dude, thank you for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it. We'll let you go. We know you've got like 4 other tours to get onto and probably some songs to listen to. So
technology.
We'll let Josh close it up with the question of the day. So take it away, buddy.
Yeah, well, obviously new Dark Angel out, extinction level event. Talk about, what's going on with Dark Angel, obviously going out playing Darkness Descends in its entirety, kind of in honor of Jim, and obviously with some new material on the way.
That's right. We have the best of both worlds in that regard, because Darkness Descends is it's a blast to go out and play. And also the fact that we have a new album coming out. It's like, I know I've been promising this for the last decade or so, since we started getting back together and doing shows. And it's been an arduous process, but I'm really excited about the record. I'm stoked about the first single. I'm stoked about the next single. We're going to be releasing another single before we hit the road in June. And so I just suggest everybody pay attention to the socials, to see what's going to happen with that. And I'm excited about the new record. We just tried to write a kick-ass metal record. We tried to write a kick-ass Dark Angel record. For it to sound like any of our other records was not important. Like we just tried to kind of focus on hey, what kind of Dark Angel record would be coming out if Dark Angel never stopped putting out albums this whole time? Where would Dark Angel be at right now in 2025? And so this pretty much encapsulates where we're at. It's a pretty aggressive record. It's pretty ferocious. I'm really into the record, and I'm into the record. I'm into the artwork. I think the artwork is killer. We got great artwork for it. And if people disagree with me, then that is your opinion. Absolutely. You have the freedom to do that. I have the freedom to work this band however we want. We get to do whatever we like with this band. So, and we try to make a real ferocious record. The album should be coming out before sometime in 2025. Absolutely. We're working towards its release, and I was really excited about it. I love it. And, it is in a lot of ways, it is a huge tribute to Jim Durkin. His style is all over it. Laura Christine, our new guitarist, her style is all over it. She's becoming the new writing partner. I've always written, a vast majority of the material, and Laura's influence is massive on it. And she writes the coolest riffs I know. That's seriously, I'm just saying that as wow, those are killer riffs. So thank you. And so there you go there. And we're just really excited to be able to have a new release to talk about. And, I figured the next, big pile of touring cycle is going to involve this new record, and we're really excited about it. And we hope people dig it. There you go.
Nice. Well, Gene, thank you, brother. Have a great one, man. Thanks for stopping by, and look forward to seeing you somewhere here this year on the road as we're traveling around the planet. So,
Well,
good to
make
see you
sure
again.
you grab my number from wherever, David. If we're ever nearby, just hit me up and we'll get you. We got tons of touring, so we'll be in touch. Absolutely.
Hey, just want to give a shout out to Non Heinous, who did our awesome skull artwork, which is kind of mascots that we have here for the David Ellefson Show. So, Josh, thank you for bringing him over. You've got his Instagram handle, right? Because you can get some discounts if bands or people want to use him for stuff, for merch, right?
Yeah, head over to Non-Heinous on Instagram, NonHeinous on Instagram. Let him know that the David Ellefson Show sent you. He'll give you 15% off if you need art for your podcast, your merch, your album, all that great stuff. And it's not he'll work with you the entire way through. He sends you like actual hand-drawn sketches. What do you like about this? Do you like that? It's not AI. It's not a bunch of nonsense. Like, he actually is an artist and he's doing some great stuff out there. He's done stuff for my podcast. He's done stuff now for the David Ellefson Show, and just a cool dude, man. And if you go check him out, just go follow him on Instagram, because you'll enjoy all of his art that he puts up daily over there too. So he's a good dude, and support the art.
Just like forming Vic Rattlehead, a
There you
sketch
go.
leading to a final mascot. So cool. Thanks, Non Heinous. We appreciate you, brother. So yeah, go check
Awesome.
him out.
But yeah, Gene Hoglan, man, what a historian, man. That he like came with the history of thrash drumming, the history of LA thrash. I was like, let's go, yeah.
Totally. And it's funny. I was down at Mercy Sessions. I remember our manager Jay Jones brought us down there when they were recording Show No Mercy down at Track Records. I think it was down on Melrose. And I remember, I think probably me and Dave went down there, and while they were recording, and I had no idea that they had cut the drums just like how we did on So Far So Good So What. That's funny that they did that just like that. But man, Bill, what a master! I did a record with him. I did a group called Killing Machine that I got invited to be a part of with Juan Garcia, who now plays in Body Count, and I brought Jimmy DeGrasso in, James Rivera. And we did that over in the Valley. We recorded that record at Bill Matoyer's house. And man, again, another icon, like a Max Norman, like Randy Burns, like any of these guys, one of the icons of making great freaking metal records. He's pretty much the staff producer for Metal Blade, through the 80s and 90s. So super, super good. So yeah, that was great, man. Super good.
Yeah. There's actually a funny little lineage in there too, with Dark Angel, Darkness Descends. If you want to say Metallica lifted the riff or not, but it did at least probably influence the one riff.
Well, as he's even tapping it out, right? Yeah. So, well, hey, they were. So, he's a leader for sure.
Right. So you got that riff that might be the impetus for one. But then the one riff influenced Dino Cazares to make Fear Factory, because he goes, well, why don't I just make a whole band like that riff? And then Gene Hoglan joins Fear Factory later on down the line. So it's like this weird, again, full circle, coming back around to itself as the theme of the day.
Well, it's cool with Gene, and I can kind of relate to this myself. he was at the ground zero of a scene starting in LA, right? He was there. Yeah. He then went on, took some sideman gigs, with Devin Townsend, Fear Factory, Testament, right? So he jumped.
Yeah.
And then, with Dethklok, he's certainly an original member, and sounds like he's very much a part of the fabric of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's cool that he's gotten to do all sides of it as an originator, founder, creator, then also jumping in and, picking up from where they are to in a lot of cases, kind of that pivotal moment when they needed to write a new chapter and have the rest of the story. He was kind of in that pivotal moment. So yeah, what a great career. Really, really, that was a good idea to have him on. So that was very cool. Good.
Yeah, he's a good dude. I was looking at his age, because he's about 3 years younger than you, and you were 18 when you joined Megadeth, so he's 15 at the time. You know what I'm saying? So it's like those, those pivotal years of 15, 16, 17, 18. Just kind of growing up in that scene. Yeah, I know he got to see Mustaine in Metallica, and he would drive. He would, told many stories of driving, making that 5-hour drive to San Francisco to see those shows as a kid and stuff like that, man. So yeah, he's definitely one of those dudes that like grew up in the scene and then obviously transcends the scene at the same time.
And I think that's the thing with Jim Durkin. He certainly had the right heart for thrash metal. He was a couple years younger than us and was maybe just a little too inexperienced, maybe a year and a half younger than me. He was just a little too inexperienced to get on stage with us in the level we needed to debut the band. And then that's why when Kerry King was suggested and then he came in, he just nailed it, because he'd already had that experience. It's funny that he'd already been to the Bay Area, as we learned from Gary Holt, and now even from Gene again. Slayer had just been up there about a month before we went up there with Megadeth. So he'd been on those stages. He had the experience. And, that's a big part of it, is to have that confidence to be able to walk on stage and own the gig. It's more than just playing the parts. But it is funny what Gene said about how he had the spider chord, for lack of a better description. The spider chord is when you play a 1-5 and then you use your middle finger and your pinky. So the Ride the Lightning riff, da 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 da, right? Right. I remember when Dave was playing that for me, and then to his surprise, it ends up on Ride the Lightning. At least they credited him and paid him for it, so not bad. Most bands don't get credited or get paid, so he made out on that deal, but. It's funny that Gene going, how does he know how to do the spider chord already? He was with the guy who invented the spider chord.
But you've been in enough bands to know that if you go and audition for another band while you're in your band, I mean, that's like cheating on your wife. That's like cheating on your girlfriend,
100%, man. What, he was over jamming with Joe's band. That's it. You got to choose my band or his band, and look, that's, it's funny when we were talking to Gary Holt, when we asked him, are you bummed you didn't get the call to go audition for, join Metallica? And he goes, Metallica was just a club band. Yeah. They didn't even have a record deal. Yeah, they're just a club band. So why would I leave
an independent record? Yeah.
Yeah. Why would I leave my club band to join that club band? You know what I mean? I mean, who knew? Right. But, so yeah, sometimes you don't know, but yeah, look, it all worked out. Jim Durkin had a great career, Dark Angel, and, God rest his soul. And Kerry, was with us for a minute and then back to Slayer, and it all worked out. So anyway, well, look, great episode. Super cool.
That was fun.
Good one.